The morning mist hung heavy over Heathrow Airport as Queen Camilla's private jet touched down on the runway. She had just returned from a week-long diplomatic visit to Switzerland, where she had attended several charity events and met with international leaders. The trip had been successful, but Camilla felt exhausted from the constant public appearances and formal dinners. As the plane came to a stop, Camilla gathered her belongings and prepared to disembark. She had packed light for this trip, carrying only 2 small suitcases and her personal handbag. The Queen Consort was known for her practical approach to travel, preferring comfort over luxury when possible. Detective Inspector James Morrison stood waiting at the airport's VIP terminal. He had received unusual orders that morning from his superior, Chief Inspector Williams. The instructions were simple but concerning. Conduct a routine security check on all royal luggage returning from abroad. This was not standard protocol, and Morrison wondered what had prompted such an order. Morrison was a veteran officer with 20 years of experience in royal protection services. He had worked closely with the royal family on numerous occasions and had always found them to be cooperative and understanding of security procedures. However, today felt different. There was tension in the air that he couldn't quite explain. As Camilla's car approached the terminal, Morrison reviewed his instructions once more. He was to be respectful but thorough in his examination of all bags and personal items. The chief inspector had emphasized the importance of discretion, reminding Morrison that any findings would need to be reported immediately to the highest levels of security. The black Range Rover pulled up to the entrance, and Camilla stepped out, greeting the waiting staff with her usual warm smile. She wore a simple navy blue coat and comfortable shoes, looking every bit the traveling grandmother rather than a member of the royal family. Her personal assistant, Sarah, followed behind, carrying a small briefcase and Camilla's handbag. Morrison approached the group and introduced himself politely. "Your Majesty, I'm Detective Inspector Morrison. I've been asked to conduct a routine security screening of your luggage this morning. It's a new protocol we're implementing for all international returns." Camilla looked surprised but nodded graciously. "Of course, Inspector. Whatever you need to do. I assume this won't take too long. I'm rather eager to get home to see my grandchildren." "I'll be as quick as possible, ma'am," Morrison replied, gesturing toward a private screening room that had been set up for the inspection. The first suitcase contained exactly what Morrison expected: elegant clothing, toiletries, a few books, and some small gifts that Camilla had purchased during her trip. Everything appeared normal and in order. He carefully examined each item, looking for anything unusual or out of place. The second suitcase was similar, filled with formal wear and personal items. Morrison noted that Camilla had been meticulous in her packing, with everything neatly folded and organized. He was beginning to think this would be a routine inspection when he reached for her handbag. Camilla hesitated for just a moment as Morrison asked to examine her personal bag. "Of course," she said, but there was something in her voice that made Morrison look at her more carefully. He noticed that her hands were trembling slightly, and she kept glancing toward the door as if considering leaving. The handbag was a beautiful leather piece, clearly expensive but showing signs of regular use. Morrison opened it carefully and began examining the contents. There was a wallet, some tissues, reading glasses, and several small items that seemed perfectly normal for a woman of Camilla's age and status. Then Morrison's fingers touched something unexpected at the bottom of the bag. Hidden beneath a small cosmetic pouch was a manila envelope sealed and unmarked. The envelope felt thick, as if it contained several documents or photographs. "What's this, ma'am?" Morrison asked, holding up the envelope. Camilla's face went pale and she quickly looked away. "I'm not sure," she said quietly. "I don't remember putting that there." Morrison studied her face carefully. In his years of experience, he had learned to read people's expressions, and Camilla's reaction told him that she knew exactly what was in that envelope. Her breathing had become shallow, and she was fidgeting with her wedding ring nervously. "I'll need to examine this as part of the security check," Morrison said gently but firmly. "Please," Camilla said, reaching toward the envelope. "Can we discuss this privately?" "There may be some misunderstanding." Morrison shook his head. "I'm afraid I need to follow protocol, ma'am. If there's nothing concerning in here, then there's nothing to worry about." He carefully opened the envelope, aware that Camilla was watching his every movement with growing anxiety. Inside were several documents and what appeared to be photographs. As Morrison began to examine the first document, his expression changed completely. The paper in his hands was a bank statement from a Swiss account, showing transactions totaling millions of pounds. The account holder was listed as C. Parker Bowles with an address in Geneva. Morrison's training kicked in as he realized the potential significance of what he was looking at. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you some questions about these documents," Morrison said, his voice becoming more official. Camilla sat down heavily in a nearby chair, her composure finally cracking. "Inspector, I can explain everything. It's not what it appears to be." "I hope that's true, ma'am," Morrison replied, "but I'm going to need to contact my superiors immediately. This inspection has become something much more serious than a routine security check." As Morrison reached for his phone, Camilla buried her face in her hands. The room fell silent except for the sound of planes taking off and landing outside. Neither of them could have imagined that this simple security check would uncover something that could potentially shake the very foundations of the royal family. Morrison looked at the remaining documents in the envelope, knowing that whatever he found next would determine the course of the investigation. The Queen Consort sat in stunned silence, realizing that her carefully guarded secret was about to be exposed to the world. The routine airport screening had suddenly become the beginning of what could be the biggest royal scandal in decades. Morrison knew that the next few hours would be crucial in determining not just Camilla's fate, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. Detective Inspector Morrison stepped into the corridor and dialed Chief Inspector Williams's direct line. His heart was pounding as he waited for the call to connect. In all his years of service, he had never encountered anything like this during a routine inspection. "Williams here," came the gruff voice on the other end. "Sir, it's Morrison at Heathrow. We have a situation with the Queen Consort's luggage inspection. I need immediate guidance." There was a pause before Williams responded. "What kind of situation, Inspector?" Morrison glanced back toward the room where Camilla sat waiting. "I've discovered documents that appear to show undisclosed foreign bank accounts. Swiss bank statements with significant transactions. This goes far beyond a security concern, sir." Williams was silent for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was tense. "Don't let anyone leave that room. I'm sending a senior team immediately. And Morrison, not a word of this to anyone else until we determine what we're dealing with." Back in the screening room, Camilla had composed herself somewhat, though her hands continued to shake as she reached for a glass of water. Her personal assistant, Sarah, stood nearby, clearly confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. "Your Majesty," Sarah whispered, "should I contact the palace? They'll be expecting you soon." Camilla shook her head quickly. "Not yet, Sarah. Let's see what Inspector Morrison needs to finish here first." Morrison returned to the room and carefully placed the envelope on the table between them. "Ma'am, I've contacted my superiors and they're sending additional personnel to assist with this matter. In the meantime, I need to ask you some direct questions about these documents." "I understand," Camilla replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Morrison pulled out the first bank statement and placed it where Camilla could see it clearly. "This account shows your name and contains transactions totaling over £3 million. Are you aware of this account?" Camilla looked at the document for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Yes, I'm aware of it. Can you explain the purpose of this account and why it wasn't disclosed through proper channels?" Camilla stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy airport tarmac. When she turned back, there were tears in her eyes. "Inspector, what I'm about to tell you must remain confidential until proper authorities can be notified. This account was established for a very specific purpose, one that I believed was in the best interests of the Crown." Morrison leaned forward, his notebook ready. "Please continue, ma'am." 3 years ago, I was approached by a representative from a charitable organization in Switzerland. They were working to recover stolen artifacts and artworks that had been taken from British museums and private collections during World War. Yet many of these items had ended up in private hands across Europe. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. The organization needed funding to purchase these items back when they appeared at auctions or in private sales. The amounts were often substantial, and they needed someone who could act quickly and discreetly when opportunities arose. Morrison was writing quickly, trying to capture every detail. "Why the secrecy, ma'am? Why not work through official channels?" Camilla returned to her seat looking exhausted. "Because official channels move too slowly. By the time paperwork was processed and approvals given, these precious artifacts would have disappeared into private collections forever. Some of these items belong to the Crown Collection, Inspector. They were stolen from us. So you used your personal funds to buy them back? Initially, yes. But as the scope of the operation grew, I established the Swiss account to handle larger transactions. The money came from my personal investments and some funds that Charles had approved for cultural preservation projects. Morrison examined another document from the envelope. This statement shows a payment of £800,000 made just last week. What was that for? Camilla's face brightened slightly. A collection of medieval manuscripts that belonged to the Royal Library. They were stolen in 1943 and had been missing ever since. We finally tracked them down to a private collector in Geneva who was willing to sell them back to us. The inspector studied the woman in front of him. Her story was plausible, even admirable, but there were still many questions that needed answers. Ma'am, even for charitable purposes, there are legal requirements for disclosure of foreign accounts, especially for members of the royal family. I know, Camilla said quietly. I planned to regularize everything once we had recovered the most important pieces. I realize now that I should have been more transparent from the beginning. At that moment, the door opened and Chief Inspector Williams entered with two other officers. Williams was a large man with gray hair and a serious expression that became even more grave when he saw the documents spread across the table. Your Majesty, Williams said with a formal bow, I'm Chief Inspector Williams. I need to inform you that this matter will require a full investigation by the appropriate authorities. Camilla nodded. I understand, Chief Inspector. I want to cooperate fully. This has gone on long enough in secrecy. Williams gestured to one of his colleagues. This is Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Bennett from the Financial Crimes Unit. She'll be taking over this investigation. Bennett stepped forward with a professional but respectful demeanor. Ma'am, I'll need to examine all these documents in detail and verify the information you've provided. We'll also need access to all records related to these transactions. Of course, Camilla replied. I have additional documentation at home that will support everything I've told you. The organization in Switzerland can also provide complete records of all purchases and recoveries. Williams cleared his throat. Your Majesty, I must ask that you not discuss this matter with anyone outside of the immediate investigation team until we can complete our preliminary review. This includes family members and palace staff. Camilla looked stricken. How long will that take? Charles will be expecting me home soon, and if I'm delayed without explanation, we'll work as quickly as possible, Bennett assured her. If your account of events checks out, this could be resolved relatively quickly. However, the legal implications of the undisclosed accounts will still need to be addressed. Sarah, Camilla's assistant, spoke up for the first time. Should I inform the palace that Her Majesty has been delayed? Williams considered this carefully. Tell them there's been a minor security protocol that requires additional time. Nothing more specific than that for now. As the investigators began photographing and cataloging the documents, Camilla sat quietly, realizing that her well-intentioned secret was about to become a public matter. She had genuinely believed she was serving the crown by recovering stolen treasures, but she now understood that her methods had created a legal and public relations nightmare. The small airport room had become the center of what could potentially become a major constitutional crisis, all because of documents hidden in a handbag that was never meant to be discovered. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Bennett spent the next 2 hours carefully examining every document in Camilla's envelope. She had called in a financial analyst and a specialist in art recovery cases to help evaluate the evidence. The small airport screening room had been transformed into a makeshift investigation center. Camilla remained patient throughout the process, answering questions and providing additional details about her secret operation. She explained how she had first learned about the stolen artifacts through a chance meeting with Dr. Heinrich Müller, a Swiss art historian who had dedicated his life to tracking down looted wartime treasures. Dr. Müller showed me photographs of items that I recognized immediately, Camilla told Bennett. There was a portrait of Queen Victoria that had hung in Buckingham Palace until 1943, and a collection of rare books that belonged to the Royal Library. I couldn't bear the thought of them remaining lost forever. Bennett made detailed notes as Camilla described how the recovery operation had grown over 3 years. What started as the purchase of a single painting had evolved into a sophisticated network of contacts across Europe. all working to identify and recover stolen British cultural treasures. The Swiss account made transactions easier, Camilla explained. Many of these dealings required quick decisions and immediate payment. Dr. Muller would contact me when something important became available, and I needed to be able to act within hours, sometimes minutes. The financial analyst, James Crawford, looked up from his laptop where he had been reviewing the bank statements. Ma'am, these transactions show a pattern that's consistent with art purchases. The amounts and timing align with major auction houses and private sales across Europe. Bennett felt some relief at this confirmation, but she knew there were still serious legal issues to address. Your Majesty, regardless of the noble intentions, the failure to disclose these foreign accounts to the proper authorities is a serious matter. There are laws that apply to all citizens, including members of the royal family. Camilla nodded solemnly. I understand that now. At the time, I was so focused on recovering these precious items that I didn't properly consider the legal requirements. I thought I could handle everything quietly, and then present the recovered treasures as a gift to the nation. Chief Inspector Williams had been on the phone with various officials throughout the afternoon. He returned to the room looking grim. Your Majesty, I've spoken with the Cabinet Secretary and the Attorney General's office. They want a complete briefing on the situation immediately. What does that mean for me? Camilla asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. It means this matter will likely become public knowledge very soon, Williams replied. We'll need to prepare a comprehensive report for the government, and they'll need to decide how to handle the political and legal ramifications. Bennett pulled out another document from the envelope that she hadn't yet examined closely. As she unfolded it, her expression changed. Ma'am, what is this document? It appears to be some kind of agreement or contract. Camilla leaned over to look at the paper Bennett was holding. Her face went pale again. Oh no, I forgot that was in there. The document was a formal agreement between Camilla and Dr. Mueller's organization, outlining the terms of their partnership in recovering stolen artifacts. What made it particularly concerning was a clause near the bottom that mentioned alternative acquisition methods when legal purchase is not possible. Ma'am, what does this clause mean exactly? Bennett asked, pointing to the concerning language. Camilla was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. Inspector, not every recovery could be accomplished through normal purchase. Sometimes items were held by people who had no legal right to them. People who knew the items were stolen but refused to return them. Williams stepped closer to the table. Are you saying that some of these recoveries involved illegal methods? Not illegal, Camilla said quickly, but perhaps unconventional. Dr. Muller had contacts who could retrieve items through methods that didn't involve monetary transactions. Bennett and Williams exchanged concerned glances. This revelation elevated the investigation to an entirely new level of seriousness. Your Majesty, Bennett said carefully, I need you to be completely honest with me. Were any laws broken in the process of recovering these artifacts? Camilla stood up and walked to the window again, clearly agitated. When she turned back, her composure had cracked completely. Inspector, these items were stolen from Britain during the war. The people holding them had no legal claim to them. We simply took back what was rightfully ours. Ma'am, that's not how the law works, Williams said firmly. Even if items were originally stolen, taking them without proper legal process is still theft. The room fell silent as the full implications of Camilla's admission sank in. What had started as a financial disclosure issue had now become a potential international incident involving theft, conspiracy, and violation of multiple laws across several countries. Bennett's phone rang, and she stepped aside to take the call. When she returned, her expression was even more serious. That was the Foreign Office. They've received an inquiry from Swiss authorities about suspicious activity involving British nationals and art transactions. They specifically mentioned the name C. Parker Bowles. Camilla sank back into her chair, realizing that her secret operation was unraveling completely.
How did they find out?
It appears that Dr. Muller's organization is under investigation by Swiss police for alleged art theft and fraud, Bennett explained. Your name appeared in their financial records, which is why the inquiry was made. Williams rubbed his forehead, clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Your Majesty, I'm afraid I have no choice but to formally caution you that you're now part of an active criminal investigation. You have the right to legal representation, and I strongly advise you to contact a solicitor immediately. Camilla's assistant Sarah, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. "Should I contact the palace legal team?" "No," Camilla said firmly. "This is my personal matter. I don't want to involve the palace until I understand the full scope of what's happening." Bennett began gathering the documents. "Ma'am, I'll need to retain all of this evidence. We'll also need to coordinate with Swiss authorities and potentially other European law enforcement agencies." "What happens next?" Camilla asked, her voice barely audible. "Next, we conduct a thorough investigation of every transaction, every contact, and every recovered item," Williams replied. "If laws were broken, there will be consequences, regardless of the good intentions behind the actions." As the investigators prepared to leave, Camilla realized that her attempt to quietly serve the crown by recovering stolen treasures had instead created a scandal that could damage the monarchy's reputation for years to come. She had tried to be a hero, but had instead become the center of an international criminal investigation. The airport screening room that had seemed so small hours earlier now felt like the epicenter of a crisis that would soon reach the highest levels of government and potentially shake the very foundations of the royal institution she had tried so hard to serve. The next morning, Camilla sat in her private study at Clarence House, staring at her phone. She had managed to return home the previous evening without the press noticing anything unusual, but she knew that wouldn't last long. Detective Chief Inspector Bennett had called earlier to inform her that the investigation was expanding rapidly. Charles had noticed her distracted behavior at dinner but hadn't pressed for details when she claimed exhaustion from her Swiss trip. Now, as she watched him reading his morning papers in the garden, she wondered how much longer she could keep this secret from her husband. Her private solicitor, Margaret Thornton, arrived at exactly 9 o'clock as scheduled. Margaret was a sharp woman in her 50s who had handled sensitive legal matters for the royal family for over a decade. Her expression was grave as she entered the study. "Camilla, I've reviewed the preliminary information you provided over the phone," Margaret began, settling into the chair across from the desk. "This situation is far more serious than I initially thought." "How serious?" Camilla asked, though she dreaded the answer. "You're potentially facing charges in multiple jurisdictions. The Swiss authorities have frozen the account pending their investigation. The British government is considering charges related to undisclosed foreign accounts and potential involvement in international art theft." Camilla felt the room spinning slightly. "What does that mean in practical terms?" Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out several legal documents. "It means you could face criminal prosecution, substantial fines, and imprisonment. But more importantly for your position, it means this will almost certainly become public knowledge within days." "What about the artifacts we recovered? Surely the fact that we were returning stolen items to Britain counts for something." "That's where things get complicated," Margaret replied. "Some of the items you recovered were indeed stolen during the war and rightfully belonged to Britain. However, others appear to have been legally purchased by their current owners, making their recovery actual theft." Camilla's phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Muller. "Emergency. Swiss police raided our offices. All records seized. You need to know they have everything." Margaret noticed Camilla's expression change as she read the message. "Bad news? Dr. Muller says the Swiss police have seized all his records. They'll have documentation of every transaction, every recovered item, every method we used." Margaret made notes quickly. "We need to get ahead of this. I recommend full disclosure to the British authorities immediately. Cooperation might be your only chance to minimize the legal consequences." At that moment, Camilla's private secretary knocked and entered the room. "Your Majesty, there's a call from Detective Chief Inspector Bennett. She says it's urgent." Camilla took the call on speaker so Margaret could hear. Bennett's voice was tense. "Ma'am, I'm calling to inform you that the investigation has taken a significant turn. Swiss authorities have provided us with extensive documentation from Dr. Muller's organization." "What kind of documentation?" Margaret asked, identifying herself as Camilla's legal counsel. "Records showing that several recovered items were actually stolen from museums and private collections across Europe. Items that Dr. Muller's organization claimed were recovering stolen British property were, in some cases, being stolen from their legal current owners." Camilla felt sick. "Inspector, I had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. Dr. Muller assured me that everything we were doing was legal and ethical." "I believe you, ma'am. But the evidence suggests that Dr. Muller was running a sophisticated art theft operation under the guise of wartime recovery. Your account was being used to fund these criminal activities. Margaret leaned forward. Inspector, what are the immediate implications for my client? She needs to surrender her passport immediately. We're coordinating with international authorities, and there's a strong possibility that charges will be filed in multiple countries. I'm required to inform you that an arrest warrant may be issued as early as tomorrow. The room fell silent. Camilla had imagined many possible outcomes, but the reality of potential arrest had seemed impossible until this moment. Inspector, Margaret said, we're prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation. My client wants to provide complete disclosure of her involvement and help authorities understand the full scope of Dr. Muller's operation. That's appreciated, but it may not be enough to prevent charges from being filed. The political pressure is enormous. The government needs to show that no one is above the law, especially members of the royal family. After the call ended, Camilla and Margaret sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Camilla spoke. I need to tell Charles. He deserves to hear this from me before he reads about it in the newspapers. Are you sure you want to do that now? Once you tell him, it becomes a matter for the palace to handle. That could complicate your legal situation. Camilla shook her head. I can't continue to lie to my husband. This is going to affect him and the entire royal family. He needs to know so he can prepare. Margaret gathered her papers. I'll draft a statement for when this becomes public. We'll emphasize your good intentions and your cooperation with authorities. But Camilla, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that you might have to step back from your royal duties while this is resolved. What do you mean, step back? I mean that if criminal charges are filed, the palace may decide that you cannot continue to perform royal functions while under investigation. It would be temporary, but it could last months or even years. The full weight of her situation finally hit Camilla. Not only was she facing potential criminal prosecution, but her role as queen consort might be suspended. The scandal could damage the monarchy's reputation and put enormous stress on her marriage to Charles. As Margaret left, Camilla remained in her study, trying to find the courage to tell Charles what she had done. She could hear him on the phone in his office, discussing his upcoming engagements with his private secretary. Soon those engagements might have to be canceled or restructured to deal with the crisis she had created. She thought about the artifacts that had started this whole ordeal. Somewhere in Switzerland, police were probably cataloging medieval manuscripts, Renaissance paintings, and ancient jewelry that she had helped recover. Some of these items truly did belong to Britain and had been stolen during the war, but others, she now realized, had been stolen again by Dr. Muller's organization. With her unknowing financial support, her attempt to quietly serve her country by recovering lost treasures had instead made her an international fugitive and created the biggest royal scandal in decades. As she prepared to confess everything to Charles, Camilla understood that her life as she knew it was about to change forever. The woman who had tried to be a secret hero for the crown was about to become its most public liability. Charles was reviewing correspondence in his private office when Camilla knocked on the door. Her face was pale and her hands were visibly shaking as she entered. He immediately set aside his papers and stood to embrace her. My dear, you look terrible. Are you feeling unwell? Camilla pulled away gently and sat in the chair across from his desk. Charles, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to everything before you respond. The seriousness in her voice made Charles sit down immediately. In their years together, he had rarely seen her this distressed. I've done something that I thought was right, but it's turned into a terrible mistake, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been secretly funding an operation to recover stolen British artifacts from World War II. Charles frowned, confused. What do you mean, secretly funding? For the next 30 minutes, Camilla told him everything. The Swiss bank account, Dr. Muller's organization, the recovered artifacts, and the growing realization that some of their methods had been illegal. Charles listened without interruption, his expression growing more grave with each revelation. When she finished, Charles was quiet for a long time. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where they had shared so many peaceful moments. How long? He finally asked. 3 years? 3 years? And you never thought to discuss this with me? Camilla could hear the hurt in his voice. I wanted to surprise you. I planned to present all the recovered items to you as a gift for the crown collection. I thought I was doing something wonderful. Charles turned back to face her, and she could see a mixture of love, disappointment, and fear in his eyes. Camilla, do you understand what this means for us? For the monarchy? I'm beginning to, she replied, tears finally starting to flow. The police say I might be arrested. They want me to surrender my passport. Charles sat back down heavily. My God, how did we get here? At that moment, Charles's private secretary, Sir Edmund Hartwell, knocked urgently on the door. Your Majesty, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an emergency call from the cabinet secretary. Charles answered the phone with a heavy heart, knowing that this call would change everything. The cabinet secretary's voice was formal and concerned. Your Majesty, I'm calling to inform you that we've received a full briefing on the situation involving the Queen Consort. The Prime Minister needs to meet with you immediately to discuss the constitutional implications. How much does the government know? Charles asked. Everything, sir. The Swiss authorities have shared their complete file with us. We also understand that arrest warrants may be issued in multiple countries. The PM needs to discuss how the Crown will handle this crisis. After the call ended, Charles and Camilla sat in stunned silence. Both understood that their private crisis had now become a matter of state. What happens now? Camilla asked. Now we face this together, Charles replied, taking her hand. But Camilla, you need to understand that I may have to make decisions as king that might be difficult for us personally. Within 2 hours, the Prime Minister arrived at Clarence's house with a small team of advisors. The meeting was held in Charles's formal reception room, and the atmosphere was tense from the moment everyone sat down. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister began, this situation presents us with unprecedented constitutional challenges. We've never had a Queen Consort facing potential criminal charges in multiple countries. Charles nodded grimly. What are our options? The legal advice is clear. If charges are filed, the Queen Consort will need to step back from all royal duties immediately. We cannot have a serving member of the royal family under criminal investigation representing the Crown. Camilla spoke for the first time since the officials arrived. I understand. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect the monarchy. The PM's chief advisor leaned forward. Ma'am, we need to be prepared for intense media scrutiny. This story will dominate headlines for weeks, possibly months. We need a communications strategy that protects both you personally and the institution of the monarchy. Over the next hour, they discussed various scenarios. If Camilla was arrested, she would immediately suspend all royal activities. If charges were filed but she remained free on bail, she would still step back but could potentially return to duties if eventually cleared. The worst-case scenario involved conviction and imprisonment, which would likely mean permanent removal from royal duties. There's another issue we need to address, the PM said carefully. Some of the artifacts that were recovered do legitimately belong to Britain. The question is whether we can separate the legal recoveries from the illegal activities. Charles looked up hopefully. What do you mean? If we can demonstrate that the Queen Consort was genuinely deceived by Dr. Muller's organization, and that her intentions were to serve the Crown, we might be able to minimize the political damage. The recovered British items could be returned to their proper places, and we could present this as a case of good intentions that were exploited by criminals. Camilla felt a small spark of hope. Would that help my legal situation? The PM's legal advisor shook his head. Not necessarily. Even if you were deceived, you still violated laws regarding foreign account disclosure and potentially aided criminal activities. The intent might affect sentencing, but it won't eliminate charges. As the meeting concluded, Charles and Camilla were left with a clear understanding of their situation. Within days, possibly hours, news of the investigation would become public. Camilla would have to step back from her royal role indefinitely. Their marriage and their service to the country would be overshadowed by scandal and legal proceedings. That evening, as they sat together in their private sitting room, Charles held Camilla's hand while they watched the news, knowing that soon they would be the main story. Do you regret marrying me? Camilla asked quietly. Charles squeezed her hand tighter. Never. We'll get through this, whatever comes. But Camilla, promise me something. Anything. Promise me no more secrets. Whatever we face from now on, we face together with complete honesty. Camilla nodded, understanding that their relationship, like the monarchy itself, would need to be rebuilt on a foundation of absolute transparency if it was going to survive the storm that was about to engulf them. Outside, photographers were already beginning to gather at the gates of Clarence House, somehow sensing that a major story was about to break. The quiet life that Charles and Camilla had worked so hard to build was about to be shattered by the very good intentions that Camilla had hoped would honor their service to the crown. The news broke at exactly 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The BBC led with the headline, "Queen Consort under criminal investigation for international art theft conspiracy." Within minutes, every major news outlet in the world was running the story. Camilla watched the coverage from her bedroom, still in her dressing gown, as reporters described her as being at the center of an international criminal network. The reports made her sound like a mastermind, rather than someone who had been trying to recover stolen British treasures. Charles found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face as she watched yet another news segment analyzing the royal crime scandal. He gently took the remote and turned off the television. "Don't torture yourself by watching this," he said, sitting beside her on the bed. "We knew this day would come." "They're making me sound like a criminal mastermind," Camilla sobbed. "They're calling it the biggest royal scandal since the abdication crisis." Outside Clarence House, dozens of reporters and photographers had gathered, their cameras pointed at every window. Police barriers had been erected to keep them at a distance, but their presence was a constant reminder of how dramatically their lives had changed overnight. Charles's phone rang constantly with calls from palace officials, government ministers and family members seeking answers and offering support. The most difficult call came from William, who was concerned about how the scandal might affect his children and the future of the monarchy. Detective Chief Inspector Bennett arrived at noon with more devastating news. Swiss prosecutors had filed formal charges against Camilla for money laundering and conspiracy to commit theft. Similar charges were expected in France and Germany within days. "Ma'am, I'm required to formally arrest you," Bennett said, her voice filled with regret. "You'll be released on bail pending extradition proceedings, but the arrest is necessary for the legal process." Margaret Thornton, Camilla's solicitor, was present for the arrest. As Bennett read Camilla her rights, the surreal nature of the situation hit everyone in the room. The Queen Consort of the United Kingdom was being arrested in her own home, while her husband, the King, watched helplessly. The bail conditions were strict: surrender of passport, daily reporting to police, no contact with Dr. Muller or his associates, and no access to any foreign bank accounts. Camilla was essentially under house arrest while awaiting legal proceedings that could take years to resolve. The immediate impact on the royal family was devastating. All of Camilla's official engagements were cancelled indefinitely. Charles had to restructure his own schedule to address the crisis and maintain public confidence in the monarchy. The palace issued a statement emphasizing that the king had no knowledge of his wife's activities, and that the monarchy remained committed to serving the British people. Public reaction was mixed. Some expressed sympathy for Camilla, believing that her intentions had been good even if her methods were wrong. Others called for her to be stripped of her titles and permanently removed from the royal family. Polls showed that support for the monarchy had dropped to its lowest level in decades. 3 weeks after her arrest, Camilla received unexpected news that changed everything. Dr. Muller, facing his own criminal charges in Switzerland, had decided to cooperate fully with authorities. His testimony revealed that Camilla had indeed been deceived about the nature of many operations. "Dr. Muller has confirmed that he deliberately misled you about the legal status of many items," Margaret explained during a meeting in Camilla's study. "He admits that he used your account to fund criminal activities while telling you they were legitimate recoveries." This revelation shifted the legal landscape significantly. While Camilla still faced charges related to the undisclosed accounts, prosecutors began to view her more as a victim of fraud rather than a willing participant in criminal conspiracy. The breakthrough came when Dr. Muller provided evidence that Camilla had specifically instructed him to only pursue legal methods of recovery. Email records showed that she had repeatedly emphasized the importance of staying within the law and had refused to fund operations when she suspected they might be questionable. 6 months after her arrest, most of the criminal charges against Camilla were dropped in exchange for her cooperation in prosecuting Dr. Muller's organization. She pled guilty to failing to disclose foreign accounts and was sentenced to community service and a substantial fine, but avoided imprisonment. The artifacts that were legitimately recovered British property were returned to the royal collection, fulfilling Camilla's original dream, though in circumstances she never could have imagined. The items included several important paintings, rare manuscripts, and historical jewelry that had been missing for over 80 years. Charles stood by Camilla throughout the entire ordeal, but the strain on their marriage was evident. They attended counseling sessions to rebuild trust and communication. Charles had to work hard to forgive Camilla for the secrecy, while Camilla struggled with guilt over the damage her actions had caused to the monarchy. A year later, Camilla slowly began to return to public duties, but her role was forever changed. She focused primarily on domestic charities and avoided any international activities. The public gradually began to accept her back, but many never fully forgave what they saw as a betrayal of trust. The scandal had lasting effects on the monarchy. New transparency requirements were implemented for all royal finances, and strict protocols were established for any charitable or cultural activities involving foreign transactions. The royal family became more open about their personal finances and activities, understanding that public trust required complete transparency. Dr. Miller was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison for running one of the largest art theft operations in European history. His organization had stolen hundreds of items worth tens of millions of dollars, using the cover of wartime recovery to justify their crimes. For Camilla, the experience was transformative. She had learned that good intentions were not enough when operating in complex legal and international environments. Her desire to serve the crown by recovering stolen treasures had instead created the biggest crisis the monarchy had faced in modern times. Years later, when asked about the scandal in a rare interview, Camilla reflected on the lessons learned. "I thought I was being clever and patriotic by working in secret to recover our stolen heritage. Instead, I learned that transparency and proper legal procedures exist for very good reasons. My good intentions nearly destroyed everything Charles and I had worked to build. The woman who had tried to be a secret hero for the crown had instead become a cautionary tale about the dangers of well-meaning deception. But through the ordeal, she had also discovered the strength of her marriage to Charles and the resilience of the monarchy itself, both of which survived the scandal and emerged stronger, if more humble, than before."